China's CATL, the company that already builds roughly 1 in every 3 EV batteries on the planet, says its new solid-state cell can nearly double an electric car's driving range while gutting the fire risk, and if it ships, it leaves battery kings like Panasonic a full step behind. Before we go any deeper, if you want to catch shifts like this before everyone else does, subscribe and turn on notifications. It genuinely takes a huge amount of work to research these breakdowns and put them together. And turning on the bell is how the next one finds you first, while everyone else is still writing headlines. For about 2 decades now, the electric car has come with a quiet little asterisk stapled to it. It is a wonderful machine, right up until it isn't. Smooth, fast, cheaper to run than anything with a gas tank. And then you take it out on a long highway drive, and somewhere past the halfway point, you start doing math you never wanted to do, watching a number on the dashboard fall while the exit signs crawl past. And if you have ever watched your range estimate drop faster than the miles you were actually driving, this one is for you. That is the first half of the asterisk, range anxiety. The nagging sense that the freedom your car promised has a ceiling, and the ceiling always shows up at the worst possible moment. Then there is the second half, rare, but real. Every so often, a headline surfaces. A lithium battery pack catching fire in a concrete parking garage, burning hot and stubborn, the kind of fire that firefighters will tell you is genuinely hard to put out. It does not happen often, but it happens often enough that it lives in the back of your mind. But before we get into where this actually falls apart, one quick thing. Breaking a story like this down, separating the real samples from the marketing, tracking who's slipping their dates and who isn't, takes a real amount of digging. So if you want more of exactly this, the shift explained before the headlines catch up to it, do me a favor and hit like and subscribe, and turn on notifications so the next one finds you. That's the whole ask. Now back to the hard part. Because a coin cell in a lab is not a car battery. A small cold thought every time you plug in overnight. 2 complaints. Range that runs out, and a battery that, on the rare bad day, can burn. On the surface, they have nothing to do with each other. One is about how far you go. The other is about whether you are safe. You would never guess they were the same problem wearing 2 different masks. But they are. And here is the part almost nobody tells you about the battery in your car right now. Both of those problems, the range and the fire, trace back to a single hidden ingredient sitting inside almost every EV battery on the road today. It is a flammable liquid electrolyte. A wet paste soaked all the way through the guts of the cell, and its whole job is to let the lithium ions shuttle back and forth between the 2 ends of the battery every time you charge and every time you drive. Without that liquid, the ions cannot move. And without moving ions, you do not have a battery. You have a very expensive brick. So sit with the strange thing here. That liquid is the hero and the villain at the same time. It is the only reason the battery works at all, and it is the exact thing that can catch fire. It is also part of why the range has a ceiling, because to keep that liquid stable and safe, engineers have to build the rest of the cell around it in ways that waste space and add weight. The liquid makes it go. The liquid makes it burn. The liquid, in a very real sense, is the asterisk. Which brings us to the challenger. And this is not some 3-person startup with a slick animation and a press release. This is CATL, Contemporary Amperex Technology Company Limited, headquartered in Ningde, in Fujian Province on China's southeast coast. Let that name sit, because most people outside the industry have never heard it, and yet CATL already builds roughly 1 out of every 3 EV batteries on Earth. 1 in 3. The battery in a Tesla, in a Ford, in a Mercedes, there is a very good chance it rolled off a CATL line. So when a company at that scale says it has solved something, that is not marketing noise. That is the largest battery maker on the planet putting its name on a claim. And the claim is a big one. CATL says it has a single swap, one change, that rewrites both halves of the asterisk at the same time. Not a better cooling system to fight the fire. Not a slightly denser pack to stretch the range. One move that goes after both, together. Here is that move, and I want you to hold it in your head because it sounds almost too simple to be real. What if you just took the liquid out? The flammable liquid electrolyte, the wet paste that makes the whole thing work and the whole thing dangerous. What if you simply removed it? No liquid. None. Now, if you know even a little about how these batteries work, your brain should be throwing up a flag right about now. Because I just told you that liquid is the only thing letting the lithium ions move. Take it out, and the ions have nothing to travel through. A battery with no electrolyte should not work at all. It should be dead, inert, a brick. So how do you pull out the one ingredient the whole battery depends on and somehow end up with a battery that is not only still alive, but better, safer, and with nearly double the range? That is the whole trick. And it is exactly where this story stops being about an old complaint and starts being about a genuine leap. By the end of this, you are going to understand exactly how deleting one liquid can nearly double how far an electric car goes, why the fires drop away, and the honest part, nobody in the hype cycle wants to dwell on. The real reason this is not already sitting in your driveway. Because there is a wall. There is always a wall. But first, the swap itself. So hold that question in your head. What if you just took the liquid out? Because the answer is stranger and simpler than you would expect. Take the liquid out. That is CATL's whole move. And it sounds impossible. You do not leave empty space. That is the mistake almost everyone pictures. An empty shell with nothing inside. And of course, that would be dead on arrival. The trick is quieter and far more clever than that. You take the liquid out, and in the exact spot where the puddle used to sit, you drop in a solid. A thin, firm layer that the lithium ions can still travel through. The wet paste is gone, but the road the ions drive on is still there. It just went from a swamp to a highway. Try to picture it this way. A water bottle that sloshes versus a firm block of gelatin. Same ions, very different rules. In today's battery, those ions are swimming through a liquid that shifts and slaps around every time the pack heats up or gets jolted on a pothole. In the new design, they thread straight through a rigid material that never moves. And that material has a name. It is called a solid electrolyte, and it is usually a thin sulfide or ceramic layer, thinner than a sheet of paper, sitting between the two ends of the cell. That is the whole idea. No magic, no exotic new physics. You swapped a liquid for a solid, and everything else about how a battery works stays roughly the same. Here is where it gets good, because that one swap does not fix one problem. It fixes two. And they are the exact two problems that have followed the electric car around like an asterisk for 20 years. Start with the fire. Remember the whole reason those parking garage headlines exist. The liquid inside a normal cell is flammable, a solvent soaked into a paper-thin separator, and when a battery is punctured or badly overcharged, that soaked separator is the fuel that lets a small fault turn into a real fire. Now take that liquid out entirely. A solid ceramic or sulfide layer simply does not burn the way a solvent does. there is no wet, flammable fuel left inside to catch. The fault that used to spread and feed on the liquid runs into a wall of solid material and stops. The fire risk does not vanish to zero, nothing does, but it drops hard. You pulled the fuel out of the fire triangle. That alone would be a headline. But it is the second payoff that the title is really promising. And it is the reason engineers have chased this for so long. To understand it, you have to know one small, annoying fact about the battery in your car right now. The negative end of the cell, the anode, is made of graphite. And graphite is bulky. It works like a thick sponge that soaks up the lithium ions and holds them, and that sponge takes up a huge amount of room for the energy it actually stores. It is dead weight and dead space that every car maker has hated for years. But with a liquid inside, they were stuck with it because the better alternative was too dangerous to pair with a flammable electrolyte. A solid electrolyte changes that math completely. Because the solid layer is stable and rigid, engineers can finally do the thing they always wanted. They can use a lithium metal anode instead of graphite. Picture swapping that thick graphite sponge for a thin sheet of pure lithium foil, barely thicker than kitchen wrap. Same job, a fraction of the space. And all the room you just freed up gets filled with more active material, which means more energy in the exact same size pack. That is where the range comes from. Not a bigger battery. A smarter, denser one, sitting in the same space under your floor. Let that sit for a moment. One swap, and you get both the safety fix and the range fix. Take out the liquid, and the fire problem eases while the range roughly jumps, because the same change that makes the cell safer also lets you pack in the pure lithium anode that stores more. Two of the biggest complaints anyone has ever had about electric cars, the long drive anxiety and the rare but scary fire, traced back to that one flammable liquid. Pull the liquid, and you are pulling on both threads at once. This is precisely why every single car maker, from Detroit to Tokyo, quietly agreed years ago that solid state was the technology that came next. Not a maybe. The next thing. And I can already hear the reaction. If it is this simple, surely someone would have done it by now. That is the right question to ask. That is the honest question. Because if replacing a liquid with a solid genuinely doubled range and cut fire risk, and everyone has known the idea for years, you would expect it in showrooms today. You would expect Toyota to be selling it. And they are not. So something is standing in the way, and it is important to be clear-eyed about what that something actually is. Here is the part that gets lost in the excitement. Everything I just described has been proven. It works. Engineers have built these cells and tested them and watched the numbers come out exactly as promised. But they built them small. Lab small. We are talking about a coin cell, a battery about the size of the button on the back of your car remote. And a coin cell is not a car battery. Say that again, slowly, because it is the whole hinge of this story. Proving that a chemistry works in a tiny sample on a lab bench and mass-producing that same chemistry into a full-size pack for a car in your driveway are two entirely different mountains. One is a science problem. The science is basically solved. The other is a manufacturing problem. And that one is not solved at all. Because there is one wall between that flawless little lab sample and the car in your driveway. And here is the twist. It is not the chemistry. It is making these solid cells at scale and at a price an ordinary driver will actually pay. That is the brutal step. That is the exact place where Toyota and Panasonic have publicly promised solid-state batteries for a solid decade, and where, year after year, quietly, without much noise, they have slid their dates to the right. And that word, manufacturing, sounds almost boring sitting next to the chemistry. It is anything but. So let me show you what this wall actually is, in plain terms, because once you see it, you understand why the smartest, best-funded companies on the planet have been stuck at the base of it for 10 years. Think about the solid part inside the cell. In a lab, an engineer can press one perfect battery by hand, taking all the time in the world, babying it, checking every layer under a microscope. But a real car needs thousands of these cells stacked together. And the world needs millions of those cars. Every single solid layer, in every single cell, has to press flat against the electrodes on both sides, perfectly, with no gaps anywhere. Try to picture it this way. Take two panes of glass and press them together until there is not one trapped air bubble left anywhere between them. Hard, right? Now do it at the speed of a factory line. Now do it millions of times in a row without a single failure. Now do it for pennies per cell, because if each battery costs a fortune, no ordinary driver will ever buy the car. That, right there, is the wall, not the science. The doing it perfectly, a million times, for almost nothing. And a gap you could never see with your naked eye is enough to break the whole thing. A microscopic space where the solid does not quite touch the electrode chokes the flow of lithium ions, and the cell dies young, or it never performs the way that beautiful lab sample did. The old liquid never had this problem. Liquid floods into every corner on its own. It wets everything, seeps into every crack, touches every surface without being asked. A solid has to be forced into perfect contact and held there under pressure. And here is the cruel twist. The very stiffness that makes a solid safe, that keeps it from catching fire, is the exact same stiffness that makes it a nightmare to build at scale. And here is where I have to be straight with you, because the difference between a sample and a shipping product is everything. The samples exist. That part is real, and I want to be clear about it. CATL has shown working cells and energy densities near 500 watt-hours per kilogram have been cited, roughly double what a strong battery in a car delivers today. That doubling is exactly the range promise sitting in the title. But the samples exist, but volume manufacturing at a consumer price is not yet real. A handful of hand-built cells in a clean room is a world away from packs rolling off a line by the thousand, cheaply, reliably, at a price you would actually sign for. And a lot of the loudest framing around all this comes through Chinese sources, so a measured skepticism is not cynicism. It is just doing this honestly. The mechanism is proven. The mass-produced car battery is not. Not yet. And CATL's own roadmap, to their credit, says the quiet part out loud. Their plan points to small-scale trial production around 2027, and only a slow ramp after that. Sit with that for a second. Even the Challenger, the company that already builds roughly 1 out of every 3 EV batteries on the entire planet, is not promising this in your driveway tomorrow. Trial production first. Then years of climbing that ramp, cell by cell, factory by factory. The honest timeline here is measured in years, not months, and anyone selling you faster than that is selling you the sample, not the car. So why should you care right now if the thing is still years out? Because this is bigger than one battery, and almost nobody outside the industry is watching it closely. Whoever climbs this manufacturing wall first does not just win a product launch. They win the next era of the whole business. If CATL cracks cheap, high-volume solid state before anyone else, the pecking order tilts hard, all at once, toward them. In finished electric cars, in the battery cells buried inside those cars, and in the mineral supply chains underneath all of it. The lithium, the graphite, the processing plants, so much of which is already dug, refined, and routed through China. The country that ships solid state at scale does not just sell more batteries. It sets the terms everyone else has to live with. And that is the part that should make Tokyo and Detroit sit up in their chairs. Panasonic, the name that powered a generation of laptops, then a generation of Teslas, and the Western pack makers built around the old liquid recipe suddenly look a step behind on the one technology every engineer in the room agreed was coming next. Now, I want to be careful here, because this is not a dunk on them. They had good reasons to move slowly. Panasonic and Toyota were promising solid state for a decade precisely because they saw it coming from miles away. They were cautious because they, better than anyone, knew how brutal that wall really was. But being right about the destination and slow on the road is still slow. If CATL crosses the finish line first, the giants who practically invented this game get overtaken inside it. That is the blunt meaning behind the headline, and it is not gloating. It is just the scoreboard. Now step all the way back to where this started. For 20 years, the electric car has carried an asterisk. Brilliant. Right up until the range runs dry on a long highway pull, and right up until you remember that rare, real headline of a lithium pack burning in a parking garage. Both halves of that asterisk trace back to one thing: the flammable liquid sitting quietly inside the cell. And the fix, it turns out, was never a cleverer liquid at all. It may simply be no liquid. Pull the liquid out, drop a solid in its place, and both halves of that old caveat fall away together. The fire risk and the range limit, answered by the very same single swap. And this is how technology curves truly move. They look flat for a very, very long time. 10 years of promises, slipped dates, lab cells that never once left the lab. Flat, flat, flat. Until the manufacturing finally clicks into place, and then it is not flat at all. It goes nearly vertical, almost overnight, and the whole world wakes up to a battery that was quietly impossible the year before. The samples are real. The wall is real. And the race to climb it is running right now. So, I want to hear from you. Which legacy battery giant do you think gets caught flat-footed first? And does China actually ship this before Toyota does? Drop it below.